In the organicist worldview of Henry David Thoreau, every part reveals the whole. Meaning, in any given ecosystem, if you were to study a particular plant in enough detail, you would understand how this particular plant manifests the energy of the entire ecosystem. You could do the same with an animal. You could do the same with a stone. The idea being that every process, properly seen, is a synecdoche, a part standing for a whole. Now, for Thoreau, and this is true of Emerson too, who desired his writing to resemble nature, certain passages function as synecdoches. There are certain brief passages in Thoreau's Walden, for instance, that are able to condense, as it were, the matter of the entire book. Remarkably, Thoreau does this at the end of the Where I Lived and What I Lived For chapter, the second chapter in the book. And he also, rather miraculously, achieves this sort of synecdochical style in the spring chapter when he describes the deep cut melting as spring arises from winter. So it's worthwhile to look at these passages to think about Thoreau's synecdochical style, which is again a reflection of his idea that the natural world is far from a machine where you would think of discrete parts moving together based on some sort of strict logic. No, for Thoreau and for Emerson and for, say, a Wordsworth or a Coleridge, a natural system is a constant and dynamic interaction between parts and wholes, where, again, the energy of the whole manifests itself in the part. The part is dependent upon the whole, but also the whole is dependent upon the part. So if we look at the last paragraph of Where I Lived For, we see in it a map of the whole book, essentially laying out the directionalities that Thoreau will explore, but also listing key image patterns that he will manipulate throughout. Let me read it, and then I will talk about it, and you will see what I mean. Time is but the stream I go a-fishing in. I drink at it. But while I drink, I see the sandy bottom and detect how shallow it is. Its thin current slides away, but eternity remains. I would drink deeper. Fish in the sky, whose bottom is pebbly with stars. I cannot count one. I know not the first letter of the alphabet. I have always been regretting that I was not as wise as the day I was born. The intellect is a cleaver. It discerns and rifts its way into the secret of things. I do not wish to be any more busy with my hands and feet than is necessary. My head is hands and feet. I feel all my best faculties concentrated in it. My instinct tells me that my head is an organ for burrowing, as some creatures use their snout and forepaws, and with it I would mine and burrow my way through these hills. I think that the richest vein is somewhere hereabouts. So by the divining rod and thin rising vapors I judge, and here I will begin to mine. Thoreau spends a lot of time in this book talking about fishing in Walden Pond, and a primary metaphor he uses when he describes his fishing is an interplay between down and up, depth and height. As he casts his line into the water, the line goes down into the depths of the pond, the murky, dark depths. And while he's doing this, especially at night, he will often look up at the moon and see himself as a kind of in a middle place between below and above, earth and heaven, matter and spirit, time and eternity. And so here he asks us to imagine his fishing. And he's fishing, but he's fishing in time. So he imagines time as a stream, and he realizes while he's fishing, which he also says is a kind of drinking. So you see he's creating all these analogies to dip into the water with your fishing line to bring up sustenance is analogous to putting your mouth in the water and drinking it up for sustenance. But in drinking at this stream, he realizes that it's quite shallow. And when he sees the bottom, what is it? It's eternity. But why? Because it's stable. It's static compared to the water, which moves over it. The water suggests temporality. The bottom suggests eternity because it's stable. But then Thoreau vertiginously suddenly says the bottom is pebbly with stars. So he's turning everything upside down. There's a kind of vertigo here where as you go, the further down you go, the higher you go up. So this becomes a way of thinking about how Thoreau's constantly dipping in the water, digging in the earth. But these activities, even though they are going downward, also get Thoreau in touch with the vital energies of the natural world, which are for him associated with eternal principles of life. So the bottom of the stream of time becomes pebbly with stars. And here Thoreau says, one of my goals in going to Walden Pond was to recover my innocence, to return to a feeling of pure potentiality. This is what he calls his morning work. He's constantly saying, every morning I woke up and I did my morning work, and this was a return to innocence. And a return to innocence is what he calls elasticity. Basically, returning to a sense of pure potential. Think about it. When you were a young person, you had a sense of grand possibility in life. You could do most anything you wanted to do. So the idea is Thoreau will, in fishing, in drinking, in going down, he is also, as it were, going back to innocence. I cannot count one. I want to get to where I'm before the sequencing of letters. I don't know the first letter of the alphabet. I want to get back to a place before language. Language is essential, but language also chops the world up into discrete units. Language also is organized by grammar, which suggests a particular temporality. To get to a pre-linguistic state, one can live purely on instinct without having words shape how one perceives. So you see how we're moving. He's fishing in the stream. He's drinking in the stream. He goes down the stream. He realizes that the bottom of the stream is a kind of eternity, and eternity is like the heavens. So he shifts upward, and suddenly, earth itself is the stream of time, and heaven itself is the bottom of the stream of time. But now it's at the top. And this activity takes Thoreau back to a sense of innocence. I cannot count one. I do not know the first letter of the alphabet. But then he suddenly says the intellect is a cleaver. It's like he's marking his progress. You go back to potentiality. You go back to a time before language if you can. You go back to a time before counting if you can. But you don't stay there. You suddenly turn the mind into something that can discern and differentiate. So it's like he's depicting a kind of interplay between the potential and the actual, innocence and experience. He's marking that movement in the book. And the movement is a constant interplay between Thoreau returning through intuition to a kind of sense of potentiality, but then also measuring the pond and drawing from very recondite philosophical theories. My intellect is a cleaver. It discerns and roots its way into the secrets of things. And then he says, I don't want to be busy with my hands and feet. I want leisure. I want a broad margin. But then what am I going to do? I'll turn my head into hands and feet, and they will burrow. So you see, again, there's this kind of interplay between up and down, high and low. My instinct tells me my head is an origin for burrowing, digging, as some creatures use their snout and their forepaws. And here Thoreau says, and with my head, that are my hands and feet, I would mine and burrow my way through these hills. Now, mining obviously means to dig into the earth to find its riches. It's analogous to dropping a line into the water to find its fish, which is analogous to putting your face in the water to draw up its sustenance. But here he says, I want to mine. Mine is a pun. I want to find mine. I want to explore myself. What is mine? So there's a sense that in finding the riches of the earth, one is also finding out who one is. The richest vein is somewhere hereabouts. So by my divining rod and thin rising vapors, I judge. So divining rod obviously is a tool believed to be able to find water, but also for Thoreau, it's a way of describing his method. He is divining the earth by trying to intuit its invisible powers. Its immaterial powers, like, okay, here I see the thin vapor rising. Well, that gives me a sense of, well, maybe I can almost magically find water. Why? Because I can intuit where it is. Now, again, this is analogous. Divining becomes a way for Thoreau to think about intuiting, sensing what he cannot see. And then if it is indeed water, he will dig down and get it. Here I will begin to mine. There's that pun again. Mine. I will mine. I will dig for earth's riches, but I will also explore myself. So the directionalities show up here, right? Going down is going up is going down. The interplay between potential and actual, innocence and experience, shows up here as well. Also the sense that to study nature is to study oneself. That shows up here as well. And vice versa, to study oneself is also to study nature. And then all these metaphors come to play that show up throughout the book. Fishing, hoeing, like digging, drinking, divining, differentiating, cleaving. So this is a synecdochical passage. It's almost as if you can understand this passage, you can understand the whole book. And the same is true of the chapter in Spring. I won't go into much detail with it, but Thoreau at springtime is watching a deep cut made by, I guess, workers who are cutting out areas for train tracks. And as he sees the ice kind of melt into mud, he imagines the globs of mud suddenly turning into lobes, like earlobes. And then he imagines these lobes turning into other organs. And then he imagines these organs turning into leaves. And then he imagines these leaves turning into trees. So there's a sense in watching the bank melt of witnessing basic metamorphoses of the natural world. Ultimately assuming that there are essential archetypal forms that manifest the energies of nature. Goethe, writing in Germany in the late 18th century, and had this idea that if we studied plants closely enough, we would find the Urpflanze, or the primal plant. In other words, a kind of primal pattern that exists in all plants. Thoreau had a kind of fantasy of this too. He would look at his windows and see frost on his windows, and the frost on the windows would remind him of leaves, and leaves would remind him of wings. And you go back to the deep cut, you can see how he's going from the globules of mud, and how they seem to shape up into guts and then to lobes, and on up, all the way up into leaves and wings. So there again, there's a sense that in that beautiful passage, if you study the chaos and the muck of the natural world, from it, if you study it closely, will arise wings and leaves. And you can move the other way as well. But there's a kind of continuum where each pattern of life is kind of analogous to other patterns of life. Everything is an analogy for something else. And all things are manifestation of the vital principle coursing throughout the universe. So these are just two examples of the synecdochical style of Thoreau. Emerson uses similar rhetoric in Nature with, say, the transparent eyeball passage. But these are rhetorical techniques, I think, that in condensing the entire book into a short space, mimic, again, any given process in nature, any microcosm, which is a manifestation of the macrocosm.